Have you ever wondered what happens when a nation becomes so divided that even neighbors and families find themselves on opposite sides? There was a time in American history when that happened, a time when the country was torn apart by war, not against another land, but within itself. This is the story of the American Civil War, a story of hard choices, great courage, and the fight for freedom. The causes of the American Civil War were rooted in deep disagreements that had been growing for many years between the northern and southern states. The biggest issue was slavery. In the South, slavery was seen as an important part of life and the economy. Many plantations relied on enslaved people to work in cotton fields and other crops that made up most of the South's wealth. In the North, however, many people believed slavery was morally wrong. Over time, the North had become more industrialized and didn't depend on slavery like the South did. This difference in how people lived and worked caused strong feelings on both sides as new states were added to the country. There were fierce debates about whether slavery should be allowed in those places. The South wanted to expand slavery, while the North wanted to stop its spread. This led to major arguments in the government and among everyday people. Many leaders from the South believed that each state had the right to make its own decisions, including keeping slavery. They called this idea states' rights. They feared that the federal government, especially with Abraham Lincoln's election, would take away their power to make these decisions. Economic differences also added fuel to the fire. The North had factories and industries, while the South remained mostly farming-based. This created different needs and priorities. Tariffs, or taxes on imported goods, were also a point of conflict. The North wanted higher tariffs to protect their industries, but the South opposed them because they depended on imported goods. All these disagreements built up over the years, creating deep divisions in the country. Eventually, when Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860, many Southern states felt they had no choice but to leave the United States. One by one, they seceded, setting the stage for war. The American Civil War officially began on April 12, 1861, with the attack on Fort Sumter, a federal fort located in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. Before this event, tensions between the North and the South had reached a breaking point. Several Southern states had already declared their secession from the United States, forming a separate government called the Confederate States of America. They believed they were defending their rights and way of life, especially their ability to maintain slavery. The federal government, led by President Abraham Lincoln, did not recognize their secession and considered it illegal. Fort Sumter was a symbol of federal authority in the South. The soldiers stationed there were loyal to the Union, but they were surrounded by Confederate forces. Supplies at the fort were running low, and Lincoln faced a difficult decision. He announced that he would send food supplies to the fort, but not weapons or reinforcements, to avoid provoking further conflict. However, the Confederate government saw any resupply attempt as a threat. They demanded that the Union soldiers surrender the fort. When the Union troops refused to surrender, Confederate forces under General P.G.T. Beauregard opened fire early in the morning. The bombardment lasted for about 34 hours. The Union soldiers, led by Major Robert Anderson, were greatly outnumbered and outgunned. Eventually, they were forced to surrender. Remarkably, no soldiers were killed during the bombardment itself, although the fort was heavily damaged. The attack on Fort Sumter sparked a wave of anger in the North. People rallied to support the Union cause, and Lincoln quickly called for 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion. This marked the beginning of a brutal and lengthy conflict. In response, even more Southern states joined the Confederacy, making war inevitable. During the American Civil War, there were several important figures who shaped the course of events on both sides. Abraham Lincoln served as the President of the United States and led the Union. He believed in preserving the Union and worked to end slavery. His leadership was marked by determination, compassion, and a strong commitment to democracy. Lincoln faced many challenges, but he remained focused on keeping the country united. He became a symbol of hope for many people who believed in freedom and equality. On the other side, Jefferson Davis was the President of the Confederate States of America. He had previously served as a U.S. Senator and Secretary of War, and he strongly supported states' rights and slavery. Davis believed the Southern states had the right to leave the Union and govern themselves. He faced difficulties in uniting the Confederate States under one government, as many Southern leaders valued their independence and were wary of centralized control. Military leaders also played critical roles during the war. Ulysses S. Grant emerged as the most successful general for the Union. He was known for his bold strategies and willingness to keep fighting despite high losses. His leadership eventually led to significant victories, and he became the commander of all Union armies. Grant's efforts were crucial in defeating the Confederacy. Robert E. Lee was the leading general for the Confederate Army. He was respected for his military skill, courage, and tactical brilliance. Lee often won battles, despite being outnumbered and facing limited resources. He became a symbol of Southern pride and resistance. However, even with his successes on the battlefield, Lee ultimately surrendered to Grant in 1865. Bringing the war to an end, these leaders, with their choices and actions, left lasting impacts on the history of the United States. The American Civil War was marked by many battles, but a few stood out for their significance and impact. One of the earliest major battles was the First Battle of Bull Run, also known as First Manassas, fought in July 1861 in Virginia. It was the first major land battle of the war and showed both sides that the conflict would not be quick or easy. The Confederate forces won this battle, giving the South a boost in confidence while shocking the North, which had expected a swift victory. Another important battle was the Battle of Antietam, fought in September 1862 in Maryland. It became the single bloodiest day in American history, with more than 22,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or missing. Though the battle was technically a draw, it stopped the Confederate Army's advance into the North. This gave President Abraham Lincoln the opportunity to issue the Emancipation Proclamation shortly afterward, which shifted the war's focus to ending slavery, as well as preserving the Union. Perhaps the most famous battle of the war was the Battle of Gettysburg, fought in July 1863 in Pennsylvania. It was a turning point in the war because it ended General Robert E. Lee's attempt to invade the North. The battle lasted 3 days and resulted in heavy losses on both sides, with around 50,000 casualties. The Union victory at Gettysburg, along with the fall of Vicksburg shortly after, began to shift momentum toward the North. These battles were not just military events. They shaped the hearts and minds of people across the country. Each one carried enormous human costs and tested the leadership, courage, and endurance of soldiers and generals alike. The stories of bravery and sacrifice in these battles remain powerful reminders of the war's lasting impact on the nation. The Emancipation Proclamation was one of the most important actions taken during the American Civil War. It was announced by President Abraham Lincoln on September 22, 1862, shortly after the Union's strategic victory at the Battle of Antietam. The proclamation declared that all enslaved people in the Confederate States would be set free starting on January 1, 1863. This announcement had a huge impact on the course of the war and on the future of the United States. Before the Emancipation Proclamation, the main goal of the Union was to preserve the nation and bring the Southern states back. However, with this proclamation, the war gained a new moral purpose: ending slavery. Although the proclamation did not immediately free every enslaved person, especially those in border states that stayed loyal to the Union, it changed the character of the war. It meant that wherever Union armies advanced into Confederate territories, enslaved people would be freed. The proclamation also had a strong effect internationally. Many countries in Europe, especially Britain and France, had considered recognizing the Confederacy because of their need for Southern cotton. But, after the proclamation, it became harder for these countries to support the South without appearing to support slavery. It also allowed African Americans to officially join the Union Army and Navy. Many formerly enslaved people and free African Americans volunteered to fight, adding thousands of new soldiers to the Union forces. Their courage and dedication helped to strengthen the Union's military efforts. The Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery completely, but it laid the foundation for the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which would fully abolish slavery in 1865. It remains a powerful symbol of freedom and justice, showing how a single decision during a difficult time can change the future of a nation. The American Civil War came to an end in the spring of 1865. After 4 years of intense and bloody conflict, the final chapters of the war saw Union forces gaining ground across the South. General Ulysses S. Grant led relentless campaigns against Confederate armies, weakening their ability to continue fighting. The Confederate capital, Richmond, Virginia, was captured by Union troops in early April 1865, signaling that the end was near. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee, the leader of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, met with General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. There, Lee surrendered his army, effectively ending the war. The terms of surrender were generous. Grant allowed Confederate soldiers to return home with their personal belongings and horses, ensuring a more peaceful transition. In the following weeks, other Confederate armies also surrendered, and the Confederacy collapsed. Though fighting had ended, the country faced the enormous task of rebuilding and healing. One of the most significant results of the war was the abolition of slavery. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution, passed in 1865, permanently banned slavery throughout the United States. Millions of formerly enslaved people were declared free, although the struggle for true equality would continue for many years to come. The war left deep scars on the nation. More than 600,000 soldiers had died, and countless others were wounded. Entire towns and cities, especially in the South, were left in ruins. The nation entered a difficult period called Reconstruction, in which leaders tried to bring the Southern states back into the Union and rebuild the economy and society. The Civil War remains one of the most important events in American history, because it determined the kind of nation the United States would become, one where freedom was extended to all people. Though the work of justice and unity would continue, the story of the American Civil War is a story of struggle, sacrifice, and great change. It began with deep disagreements over slavery, states' rights, and how the nation should grow. It led to fierce battles and painful losses, testing the courage and endurance of countless people. Through leaders who stood firm, soldiers who showed great bravery, and citizens who kept hoping for peace, the war shaped the future of the United States. In the end, the Union was preserved, and slavery was abolished, bringing freedom to millions. But the war also left behind many wounds, both seen and unseen, that took years to heal. This chapter in history reminds us how important it is to face difficult truths, to stand for what is right, and to remember that even in the hardest times, hope, kindness, and courage can help a nation move forward toward a better future.